If this video feels familiar, it's because in 2016 I made my first hidden mental illness in anime video. That's my personal way to bring mental illness awareness and brush away the stigma it has by showcasing those traits that makes us unique beings portrayed in shows we love so much. In 2018, 2 years later, I did a second one. Now we're in 2020, so I think it's only fitting we dive back in to update this trifecta. Now, of course, here's also an obligatory disclaimer. I, Misty / Chronexia, am no way qualified to provide accurate mental diagnosis. I'm just a dude with a lot of time on my hands, partly due to a quarantine, that knows how to Google stuff better than your average Joe. Some of these quote-unquote illnesses aren't illnesses, they're syndrome, disability, or purely a mental condition I found interesting to talk about. Lastly, I'm only taking one entry per franchise and one illness as well, so we don't end up with a list full of PTSD and can cover as much ground as possible. Let's open up the clinic with number 1, Hitoribochi with social anxiety. Hitoribochi is a fascinating anime about a girl who transitioned to a new school, but she has a deep-seated anxiety, almost panic attack-like, when it comes down to interacting with other people. And unfortunately, she doesn't know anyone at this new school. There's a difference between being an introvert and social anxiety will hit you like a train. It can cause temporary paralysis, palm sweaties, knees weak, arms heavy, mom spaghetti. It can also be very hard to watch. You wish you could reach out and help these people, but that just often puts more pressure on them. Number 2, Bakuman. Workaholism, stress, burnout, anxiety. I want to talk about this one desperately. Workaholism isn't a mental illness by itself, but it can induce stress, burnout, and anxiety when you work at it so much. And I relate to this very much because I'm like that too. You put so many hours of your time that your work becomes your worth, and when your work doesn't perform, your head starts thinking you are the issue. So that brings self-loathing, paranoia, you start searching for what doesn't work out, why is your video not performing as well as the other ones, and then you compare yourself to your friends doing the same thing that still works and slowly start losing your mind. There's a bit of projection in here. In Bakuman, it's nothing up to that extent. I'm hyperboling it. The main character does end up in intensive care from overworking himself, and yet he still wants to keep going. Addiction to work is also a type of mental illness. Number 3, Happy Sugar Life. The connection of reality. The first episode begins with the viewer feeling quite empathetic to Sato's situation. But that feeling turns inside out when you realize she's just flat out cuckoo. She has a complete disconnection of reality that's a mix with antisocial personality disorder, ASPD. She clearly suffers from some form of psychosis like schizophrenia, which is when you hear voices in your head telling you to kill. Or just do things or see things that aren't there. She's got schizoaffective disorder, which is a situation where someone's mental health is affected by said hallucination, delusion, or purely mood swings like mania or depression. She has borderline personality disorder, BPD. That's when your emotion controls you and are haywire, often due to unstable relationship or a distorted sense of self. And last but not least, she has a severe codependent personality disorder, CPD. That's when you're reliant on another person entirely, not as much physically, but more so emotionally, which is why she keeps Shio captive under the guise of, just a compilation of misleading, twisted information. You got all that? Number 4, Grimgar. Self-worth and survivor's guilt. Self-worth is something a lot of people downplay, often paired with the imposter syndrome, where you feel like you don't belong or don't deserve whatever goodness happens in your life. It's something I too struggle with for life. Not just me, but YouTubers who burst out and get quote-unquote famous for something we don't feel we deserve can be quite overwhelming at times. But once you know who you are as a person, you can realize your worth comes from inside you. It's not a label people can put on you, which is why this can play with survivor's guilt. A syndrome some people get when they see the demise of other people and feel like they should not have survived themselves. But you know what? Fate doesn't work like that. Not the anime, the actual concept of fate. You can be at the top of your health one day, but then the next day the Yellowstone supervolcano erupts and wipes off half of North America. Oh yeah, it's a real thing, but just don't look into it if you appreciate your sanity. Appreciate what you have and don't dwell too much on what ifs. But yeah, Grimgar, great show with a character that needs a boost in self-confidence for sure. Number 5, Pataki no Kanojo, Psychopath. Not to be confused with sociopath, a mix-up people often do. Psychopath is someone who takes pleasure out of someone's misery. They literally get their rocks off watching someone struggle, get hurt, injured, or simply are put in situations that are discomforting, like someone losing an argument or embarrassing themselves in public. If you take innate pleasure into seeing this or causing this, that's psychopathic behavior. You should bring that into the shop, cause that's messed up, yo. Anyway, back to our anime thematic. It happens in the show called Pataki no Kanojo. I would tell you the character, but that would be a big spoiler plot twist, and I just recommend you try it out on your own. It's not very long, so you can find out who it is. Don't worry, it's pretty easy to spot. It's like neon and flashing. You can't miss it, really. Number 6, Yojo Senki, Sociopath. Not to be confused with psychopath, a mixed up people often do. A sociopath is someone who is completely unfazed by social standards. They don't understand other people's feelings, making actions that can hurt others with a complete disregard for the rest of the population. They don't feel shame, they are self-fulfilling, and care about themselves above all else. It's basically egotism dialed up to 11, and it goes without saying that if you've seen Yojo Senki, it's a prime candidate for Tanya, the main character. The line is often thin between psychopath and sociopath, but Tanya doesn't get necessarily a kick out of hurting people, less so than advancing her own personal agenda, which makes her a sociopath, not so much a psychopath. Number 7, Tsubasa Reservoir Chronicles with Amnesia. Often used as a plot device for mystifying a character's past or simply holding back character development for later. In the case of Tsubasa Reservoir Chronicles, Sakura, the main girl protagonist, suffers from magically induced amnesia, if that's a thing. She gets her memory stolen, and the other protagonist must go through multiple worlds to restore her memory. Amnesia is downplayed a lot, often for fairy tale reasons, but if you would like a rather really tragic take on it, I recommend checking out the anime F, A Tale of Memories, or Ishukan Friends. Number 8, Gunslinger Girls. PTSD, depression, child soldier, amnesia, and so much more. PTSD is a super easy tag to go to whenever making a list like this. Honestly, the 20 slots could be about characters that have PTSD. Generally, to make someone interesting, shows, mainly dramas, will give a character some form of traumatic events that will steer their personality in a certain way. I think Gunslinger Girl did it in a way that at the very least deserves to be looked into. The premise of the show is taking orphan girls, basically brainwashing them, and turning them into amnesic child soldier to further advance political goals. It's very tragic seeing them turn into essentially tools of war. Number 9, Bertum. Another case of post-traumatic stress disorder paired with androphobia. Again, PTSD, but this one is triggered by androphobia. If you saw my video on phobias that I did a few weeks ago, androphobia is the fear of man. After being raped by some people, the main girl character is left with a pretty big mental scar, which makes her quite afraid of any interactions with guys. Causing some trust issues from the get-go, she eventually gets through it, kind of, but it's interesting to see a character with some depth that actually goes beyond being simply a hot girl with no problems. Number 10, Parasite, Alien Hand Syndrome. This one is a fascinating take on the whole premise of the show. Of course, it's a supernatural premise with parasites that turn the hand of the main character Shinichi into an actual being with a mind of its own. But did you know that there is an actual mental condition called Alien Hand Syndrome? This is an illness where people swear that their limbs are acting up on their own, without them having any control in the matter whatsoever. Kind of similar to Shinichi's situation. It's a real thing, also called Dr. Strangelove Syndrome. Of course, these people weren't infected by an actual parasite, but it's very interesting to look into if that's the kind of thing that piqued your curiosity. Number 11, Kawai No Kikuchi, Major Depressive Disorder. This is pretty spoiler for the movie A Silent Voice, so if you are planning on watching it at some point, I recommend you skip to the next entry. In A Silent Voice, you have a main character named Nishimiya who's deaf, meaning she cannot hear. Because of that, she's bullied a lot by her classmate, notably Ishida, who several years later see the errors of his way and seek repentance towards her, but unfortunately the years of bullying left her with some severe scar and gave her major depressive disorder to the point where she can't bear it anymore and tries to kill herself. An attempt nearly missed when Ishida rescued her from the edge, but in the process he also get injured instead. That's the whole movie. Number 12, Akira, Severe Inferiority Complex. Akira is without a doubt one of the finest anime movie ever made, even to this day. It still stands the test of time. And in it is a character named Tetsuo with a severe inferiority complex. An inferiority complex is when you feel like you are beneath everyone else, you feel inadequate in your skills, or as a person, very similar to self-worth, but the difference is that an inferiority complex stems from comparing yourself to someone else. Generally, someone you consider an equal in some way, whether that's in terms of age, skills, or general status. Tetsuo getting rescued by Kaneda makes him feel inferior to him. It's a big part of the plot, really. Number 13, Air Gear with split personality, also known as dissociative identity disorder, also known as multiple personality, or DID, is when you have essentially two or more people living inside your body. It's often paired with schizophrenia, since this usually comes with all the personality talking to each other like they're all inside one big room in your brain, but one of them decides who pilot the body. It actually happens with one of the main characters in the novel I wrote, Chronexia and the Eight Seals, if I can shamelessly plug that in. But if not, then have a look at Air Gear. I took this example where the split personality don't tangle with schizophrenia too much. It's just one personality that decides to take control with Agito, and honestly I think it's pretty badass in the concept of the anime. You can also kind of see the same in Demon Slayer with Zenitsu when he falls asleep / passes out. Not exactly the same, but we'll count it, fuck it, who's gonna stop me? Number 14, Psychopaths with Paranoia. The premise of Psychopaths happens in a dystopian future where everyone's mentality is calibrated to be within a certain range. If you're outside of that range, then a squad is dispatched to take care of you. Which of course seems good on paper to live in a utopian world, except that breeds a lot of paranoia. Paranoia, if you're not too familiar with the illness, is a mental condition where you believe something is happening when there is no ground for it to be true. Conspiracy theories are a form of paranoia, but generally it's more in the vein of he's going in the same direction that I am, he's following me type of deal. It's a fun show, and the third season of it just finished airing in 2019 if you want to catch up to it. Chair sounds. Number 15, Koochoo Buranko with everything. I'm using the term everything here because it's more of a case-by-episode scenario. In every new episode, a patient walks in with a pre-existing condition in a psychiatric ward, and then they meet the nurse and the doctor. The show is labeled as a comedy, but it has a very adult and drama take on the mental illnesses it approaches, and well, since it covers several, it's hard to boil it down to one single condition. The visuals are trippy, for sure, but if you can get past that, there's a lot this anime can offer. Worth checking out if you're looking for more than one condition to cover in a single anime. Number 16, Comical Psychosomatic Medicine with everything again. Similarly, there's also Comical Psychosomatic Medicine, a severely underrated anime in the same vein than Koochoo Buranko. Like, seriously, I don't know anyone that knows about this anime, less even have seen it. This is a very short show where each episode's about 5 minutes long, and every episode's cover a very specific case or category of mental illnesses. A more traditional art style visually and some very colorful characters, but it's a pretty digestible format. They cover several disorder, but in an upbeat, comical, and cheerful manner that isn't disrespectful. Call it infotainment, being both informative and entertaining. They use joke and pop culture reference, but again, it's done in a tasteful way. I know shorter anime aren't really something a lot of people care about, but if you do, I think it's much underappreciated. Number 17, New Game with Autistic Spectrum. Alright, people always get ups in arms whenever I put autism on a list like this, cause it's not an actual illness, it's part of a spectrum, and you're right. There are some very high-functioning autistic people, and those are usually the one type that gets portrayed in anime, such as in New Game with Hifumi. There's no straight-up diagnosis for her situation, but by behavioral cognitive association, we can kind of assume she has some autistic tendencies, most notably her quietness and her avoidance to look at other people directly. One trait of autism is the lack of eye contact. It could be her general personality, but it's not an outlandish conclusion to pull to. That being said, if you want an actual serious take on autism, the manga called Hikari to Tomo ni Jihei Shouji wo Kakaete, or With Light Raising an Autistic Child, is a fascinating read I strongly recommend. It's about 92 chapters and it will change your perception assuredly for the better. Number 18 with The Ancient Magus Bride and Dependent Personality Disorder. Very similar to Happy Sugar Life, in Ancient Magus Bride you have Chisei, a formerly orphan girl who gets adopted by a very famous magus, a magician who decides to take her in and show her the ropes of the magical world around them. Maybe it's due to where she comes from or his overwhelming presence and overprotective nature, but Chisei quickly becomes self-dependent of him, wanting his approval and tying her personal worth to his satisfaction, so that one day she can become his bride. Bit of a slow-paced anime, but well worth the experience if you like characters with a dark past having their own upbringing. Number 19, The Gray Man with Lima Syndrome. If you've seen my previous videos on hidden mental illness, because again, this is the third one, you might have heard me talk about Stockholm Syndrome. That one, if you're not familiar, is when a captive person, during a hostage-like situation, falls in love with its captor. Lima Syndrome is actually the opposite of that, where you have the captor fall in love with its victim. It's something we can experience in The Gray Man with Road in regard to her infatuation with Alan. But if you'd like to see this in an actual TV series, I highly recommend the show called Money Heist on Netflix. Not sponsored. They showcase both Lima Syndrome and Stockholm Syndrome very well. And finally, number 20, Selector Infected We Cross with Survivor's Guilt, Self-Worth, Social Anxiety, Inferiority Complex. I'm wrapping up number 20 with essentially a show that encompasses several illnesses we've talked about previously. Selector Infected We Cross is an anime about a girl invited to play a card game, but winning or losing has some pretty massive repercussions. It has a dark magical girl twist and really adds some psychological flavor to the trope that is very welcome to me. A very shy and awkward girl is put in the middle of a battle where she must defeat the other players, but it has a cost. It's a very interesting take if you like good tensions in anime. This is it, 20 brand new cases of hidden mental illnesses. Again, I am not a qualified psychiatrist, so take these diagnoses with a solid grain of salt. These are just similarities I could draw between real illnesses and made-up characters. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more. I'll try to make the next one before the 2 years gap happens again. If you missed the previous ones though, feel free to check them out in the recommended video at the end card. This is the third one we did of hidden mental illnesses, so you got plenty in store waiting for you if you really like this. Also, recently we did a video on anime characters with phobias. I'll also link that at the end. Maybe that's interesting to you? Yeah, this is where the video ends. Can you believe I've made videos for over half a decade and I still don't know how to make a decent outro that doesn't sound like I'm...
I've been through the hard times, I've been on the wrong side, I've been ashamed. So many memories, you know I'd like to change.